The Open Highway podcast is a production of Viking Dog Entertainment, and now you can visit the all-new Viking Dog store for access to everything that Viking Dog has to offer. Movies, books, and apparel, including motivational lines, open highway merchandise, and exclusive wolf designs that raise money for wolf rescue organizations. So visit thevikingdogstore.com today.
This episode is brought to you by Our Weird World. Every week, I, John Henson, dive into weird, crazy, and forgotten stories from the history books that you have probably never heard before. I try to put some humor into it, or maybe I just come off sounding like a dick. That's really up for you to decide. But join me every Monday. Subscribe everywhere that you get your podcasts.
You're a Midwestern boy. Did you grow
Wauwatosa,
up?
Wisconsin.
Oh, where's that? Where?
You haven't heard of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin?
I haven't. I lived and worked in Chicago. I can't say that I ever got out there.
It's a suburb just west of Milwaukee.
Okay. So did you want to be a reporter when you grew up? Like, were you into journalism from an early age?
Not journalism. I always loved writing. What I wanted to be was center fielder for the Milwaukee Brewers. And then I went off to Bucky Dent's baseball camp in Florida. And for a week, this is in high school, for a week, I was around only dudes who only cared about baseball. And after that week, I was like, I don't want to be a baseball player anymore. But I always loved to write. And so I thought about creative writing. And my mother was like, there's no way I'm sending you to college to major in creative writing. She was very like career oriented, like be a doctor or lawyer. So kind of the compromise was journalism.
It's because she figured there's a paying career in there somewhere.
Yeah, it sounded like a job. My high school girlfriend's folks had both majored in journalism, where I ended up going to school, and her dad was like a sports columnist at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, so he was a very successful guy. So it seemed like a real job to her.
Yeah, and newspapers will be around forever. So it seemed at the time like,
no, it's so funny. So this was the mid 90s, and he told me, he's like, Kai, don't do it. Do not major in journalism. It's a dying industry. I mean, this was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And even back then, like this guy who was very successful, like he had like done great, was still like, oh, it's bad. And people would kill to be back in that world of journalism versus what it is today, because it's so bad today.
Oh, it is bad, because I used to write for the Chicago Tribune City News Service and a few other papers.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this in the pre-interview. We were probably within a few miles of each other several times, because I was in Chicago, you were up at Northwestern. So nice to see you again, buddy. But it's changed so much, because now journalism is whoever can come up with a story, whoever can post something, whether it's a podcast or a blog or just freelancing for somebody else. Although we used to make not great money, but we used to be able to make a living at it. And now when I write freelance for some people, the rates that they throw out are incredibly, like a penny a word. It's I'm like, I can't live on that, so I don't even do a lot of freelancing anymore. Do you think that you have students, because you teach?
Yep.
You're a visiting assistant professor at Loyola.
Yep.
So what do you teach the next generation? Are you just looking at them every day and being like, wow, you should have gone to the accounting school, you really should have? Or do you fulfill them? Do you give them faith?
Well, sure. I try to do my best, and we have students who, get amazing first jobs and are doing it. You can still do it, including and students whose parents. It's not that their parents are rich and they can take a horribly paying job, like they're going out and making it work. But I teach a lot of I teach all sorts of classes and all sorts of grades, but I teach a lot of the intro class, a lot of freshmen and people who aren't necessarily journalism majors. And as I tell them, the class, like, it's just good to know this stuff. Most students come in as freshmen or as non-majors. They can't tell the difference between journalism and marketing and propaganda and disinformation. I mean, lots of people are in that boat, right? But I'm always struck, especially marketing. They have almost many of them have almost no sense of the difference, and I think that's largely because of social media, and they've just grown up in this digital world that does conflate the two. But I think even just being able to tell the difference between real information and disinformation or misinformation or propaganda, that's great for your whole life. So
it's instilling some of those cognitive skills that they may not have come up with. And you're right though too, because if you watch, like, let's pick on one network, CNN. If you watch CNN, for example, they all do it, but let's just say CNN, they may have a package that they put out there that it's presented as news, but it's actually information just coming. It's an infomercial coming from corporate. ABC might be a better, like ABC News might be a better version of that because they're owned by Disney. So they'll package the new Disney movie as something that's breaking news, but it's not. It's a literal infomercial for the new Marvel film. And we take it as news, not a commercial.
Absolutely. And local news stations are in such dire financial straits often, or are run by a handful of corporations that care only about money, that they'll take anyone who gives them $1,000 and do a segment with them in the morning about whatever it is. I'm forgetting the guy's name, but someone just went on, or was it a couple guys went on several morning shows with an entirely bogus company and product, and had no problem. It was already like, you're watching it, it's like, how can they believe this is real? But they never questioned it. They're journalists. They never made sure it's real. Like, they never made sure this person that they're giving airtime to is honest. It's bad news. And like, I think the new Spider-Man trailer for the new Spider-Man movie just came out. There are people lined up around the block to watch the trailer in like a movie theater. It's a commercial.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But that's what you can go online now, and you can try to do be a journalist or do an investigative story and put it on YouTube or put it on one of the services, and you'll get a couple hundred hits. But they'll watch somebody watching a video game or a commercial, and they'll get millions of hits of somebody watching somebody. It's the whole world's on its head. It's bizarre. And if you try and get stories out there, it's very, very difficult. And then there's a whole gatekeepers kind of situation as well. But how do you teach your students? Like, what do you work with them on so they can figure these things out? Is it just opening their eyes? Is it giving them tools and skills?
Yeah, it depends, as they go through the year, it's both, knowledge and just skills. I mean, we have classes, they're 1 credit as opposed to 4 credit classes that are just, here's how you use a camera, here's how you record professional audio, giving them the equipment and teaching them how to use it. Here's how you do computer assisted reporting, which is hugely important these days. So we try to do both. I often tell students, especially students who are come to my class who maybe aren't majors yet and are interested after the class in majoring, I'll sometimes say major in economics or major in history or major in computer science and minor in journalism. That way, when you get out, you have this previous knowledge or skill set that will really aid you in getting a job and in doing really good journalism. Know how to do everything, but know a lot about one thing. Is often what I tell them.
Yeah, because the days of the general assignment reporter are kind of gone, aren't they?
Absolutely, and that's what I was. Definitely a generalist, and when I came up, that was a great thing to be. But yeah, things have changed.
It was fun though, wasn't it? Because you got to learn a little bit about everything. I remember being a daily beat reporter, and it was one day it was a crime, and the next day it was the charity function, and the next day you were interviewing the mayor, and the next day it was a fire, and it was always something new, and you never knew what you were going to cover, and you really learned how to deal with different people and different temperaments and how to talk to them, and it seemed that we created this toolkit. And I mentioned that like before with your students, is not every situation is going to be the same when you're reporting on something, and you're not going to deal with a politician the same way you deal with a grieving mother. So you
Right.
have to have a totally different approach to each one. I think it really helps you in life too. Um, Also helps you drink heavily as a journalist because you deal with all the heartache, but maybe I'm not saying.
I make those jokes with students sometimes, and they don't laugh. They don't get them about like, haha, drinking too much. I think they immediately go to, oh, that sounds like a serious problem. Why are we laughing about this? It's really interesting about, and I'm not saying they're humorless. They absolutely are not humorless. They have good sense of humor, but it is interesting how that sort of thing is changing. Newsrooms are very different than they were when we came up.
They are. They were just
yeah.
changing they were just becoming very corporate when I kind of got out of it. You answered to the corporate board, you answered to the corporation, not necessarily your editor. I mean, you still
Right.
answered to your editor, but they were dealing with accountants, and they were dealing with numbers, and they were dealing with policy changes. I mean, one change at the Tribune when I was there is people who got books or any sort of review material. So even the book editors, as soon as they read the book, they had to return it to the publisher or to whoever sent it, because it was deemed otherwise it would be a gift, and then thereby it might change the way they felt about something. They weren't allowed to accept calendars. They weren't allowed to accept any sort of outside item. They had to ship it back. Or I think there were a few cases where they were able to like donate them if they couldn't ship them back, but they were not allowed to keep them. So that was a corporate entity that kind of came in when I was there. It's changed a lot. No more days of like, here's $100, review my movie, review my book.
I didn't know the rules were that strict. I think the New York Times, I believe I'm right about this. It might not be. Basically, the rule is nothing more than a cup of coffee. If you're talking to a source or whatever, anything more than that, you can't keep. If I used to be an automotive journalist for a time, and the car companies would have these junkets where they'd fly reporters into some nice location, and they'd have a bunch of the new cars available so we could drive them and test them out and then write about them. But the automotive writer at the New York Times, they didn't take that trip. They flew themselves out. They didn't like get their hotel room paid for. They paid for their own hotel room. Whereas us magazine guys were like, yeah, awesome. I can't afford it otherwise. Like my publication will never pay for this. So,
well, speaking of magazines, so the way I came across you is you have a cover story on Men's Journal this month, right next to Kevin Hart. And I have to read something real quick, because so it's called California's Slow Burn: How the Golden State Lost its Luster. And then on the editorial page, I don't know if you've read this yet.
I don't think I have.
The letter from the editor.
The
very end, he goes through, he tells this whole story about another article, and he talks about Kevin Hart. And then the very end, okay, enough romanticizing. Check out the Porsche on page 12, our epic gift guide on page 22, and California's obituary on page 42. Enjoy the issue.
Hey, you got to sell magazines, okay?
I had to laugh at that. So did you come up with the idea for the article, or was it just like a pitch meeting and you got assigned to it? Or how did you guys decide to do this piece?
I did actually, when I pitched to them, I'm like, this is a half-baked idea. They're never going to go for it, but I'll suggest it anyway, because I think there's something interesting in there. And my pitch was basically, California, is it good or bad? Because I think I've lived here 11 plus years, and I still can't decide in a lot of ways. I gave some suggestions of, it's laid out basically the way I had suggested we could lay it out and organize it. But yeah, they really liked that idea. And I think it turned into a fun piece.
It did. It's laid out really well, because, and I urge everyone to run to your newsstands, because we still have those, or your Barnes and Noble. It's laid out really well. So you hit the environment, you hit quality of life, then you hit government, the outdoors, the economy, and then the future. Noticeably, the future section is really short. So I don't know if that's a subliminal thing or not. But
Picking the future is a fool's game. So
there you go.
Didn't want to do too much.
You're a reporter. You can only deal with facts.
There
can't
you go.
deal with that. But the thing that jumped out at me are these are all conversations that I've not only had on the show, but I've had in my day-to-day life. So that's why it resonated with me. And that's why I reached out to you, because I was like, these are discussions that people really, really are having right now.
Yep.
I know a lot of people who've moved out of the state personally. I know stories of other people who've moved out of the state. A lot of wealthier people, celebrities, people who've realized they can do what they do from anywhere in the country at this point. And, the way you hit it, like the environment, we're facing that here. We just came out of a drought. Now, supposedly we're going back into a drought. You've been here long enough. It's California. We have mudslide season, fire season, earthquake season, and now we have tsunami season, or the Santa Anas, or it's always something. But the whole thing too is no one's allowed to talk bad about our state except for us.
Right. Yes.
It's
although
like
plenty of other people do talk bad about the state. Yeah.
Yeah, but then we jump on it. We're like, no. Only we could say that. But one thing that jumped out is the government section, because California, we're in an odd place, because California has always been this sort of bastion of liberal rulings, of laws, of we set the pace for the nation. And there are those sometimes now who start to say, okay, we've gone too far as a state. It's more LA and San Francisco are setting the pace for the rest of the state. Would you agree with that? What did you come into as you were writing the article? Like, were you seeing effects of that?
I've kind of just always it's the conventional wisdom. And I kind of always just, also accepted it that was the case. But then when I started researching and reporting this article, and I really started to think about it, my take was just that it's not that California's policies are so liberal, it's that they adopt policies that eventually become popular everywhere sooner than everyone else adopts them. As an example, legal pot and legal gay marriage, right? I mean, sure, there are people in the country who oppose those two things, but in general, those two things are enormously popular. But when, say, San Francisco, legalized gay marriage, or when did California legalize medical marijuana? It was a long time ago.
Yeah,
people were like, how California, what are they doing? But they just did something before everyone else that now is just commonplace.
But we did. When was it? 2000. I'm going to show, it was 2010, 2000, when we passed the thing that made gay marriage illegal for a short amount of time. But what a lot of people don't realize is that wasn't really our state. That was a lot of, they proved that it was a lot of money coming from, I believe it was Utah and some other groups. So we were looked at as like, oh, well, you legalize gay marriage, now you're going to make it illegal. It's like, no, that wasn't the will of the people. That was lobbyists and PACs and other groups that came in from outside the state.
Was that a proposition?
Yeah. When that happened, and then it got overturned, and we the next time. But where did you do a lot of your research? Where did you pull? What did you use as your source material or your facts, or where did you go to for the article?
I, first of all, just read a lot, of journalism, reliable sources, California newspapers, national newspapers about California. There's so much information you can find, public information, government information. I think, again, students often, their minds are blown when I show them in our investigative reporting class how much information you can find without any special privilege or passwords or whatever. Looked at that sort of thing, and I interviewed people smarter than me, or people who know more about this sort of thing than me. That's always the best way to do it, is find good people who already have this information in their head because they've devoted their lives to it, and I talked to them.
But you checked your sources. Always
Of
check
course,
your
and
sources, right?
double check them. Yeah, yeah,
If your mother says she loves you, check it out.
yeah.
That was
I
always
love that
the
phrase.
word of advice.
Yep.
Um, so you also we got into quality of life and government, the outdoors, the economy is something that
Hmm.
jumped out at me as well. Because we've got, you know, Tesla and SpaceX, you know, they're moving out. We've got other companies that are moving out of the state, and it's difficult. Did you talk to anyone about the difficulty of actually operating a company in California when it comes to taxes? And, you know, there's always the accusation that California is actually not a business friendly state because of so many costs and so many hurdles.
I did. I talked to mainly. I talked to UCLA economist named Jerry Nicholsberg, and the story has both. Here's the good stuff about California, but then the majority of the article is here's maybe the not so good stuff that people don't talk about as much.
Mm-hmm.
So what I really wanted to talk about was the not so good stuff relative to the economy. As I said, UCLA economist has done work related to California and its economy, really good source. Um, he did not have much bad to say
Really?
about California's economy. Yeah, he acknowledged certain things that for instance, that COVID, the pandemic, just decimated service jobs in California. Relies on a bunch of tourism, has a ton of service jobs, and that those haven't really come back. So, as I say in the story, not everyone in California works for Apple or Google or Facebook. So even if they're doing great, that doesn't mean the whole state is doing great. So he acknowledged that stuff, but he thought California's economy is doing well. Isn't completely equitable or equal, but isn't completely egregious either. That was his take.
It sounds like, so I want to be clear, like the article doesn't, it's definitely not a downer at all.
No.
It doesn't come in and say we're all doomed to move to Rhode Island. It doesn't say that. It really
Rhode
lays out
Island.
the way. I don't know. I was trying to come up with some random place that Californians would suddenly think, ooh, Rhode Island. Because everybody's going to Arizona and Texas, apparently.
Right.
And Idaho. It doesn't do that. It doesn't sit down. It lays it down really nicely. It's like, here's the perception. You go through each category. You're like, here's the perception. It's this government. It's the jobs. It's the economy. It's the outdoors. And then it comes in and it says, well, let's take off the rose-colored glasses and literally look at it and be like, okay, there are some problems. There is still a California dream, but you need to adjust what you think that dream is. Was there any pushback, like when you delivered the article to Men's Journal?
Mm-hmm.
What was the response to what you delivered?
Very positive. Not a ton of edits. We always do a second draft, but it's very close to what I turned in. The one thing that we talked about beforehand and that I agreed with was let's not get political per se. I talked about government in California, the way it's set up,
Mm-hmm.
some of the goofy things about, California's constitution, the propositions that Californians face on ballots every year. But we just didn't want to make it, us versus them, whoever us and whoever them is, because then people just tune out of the article and either be like, yes, they believe what I believe, or I'm going to stop reading. They don't believe what I believe.
Yeah.
So that was really the one thing we wanted to avoid. But yeah, everything else, and I think the way you put it is exactly right. I don't hate California. I don't think when I say California good or bad, I don't really think it's bad, but it has a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't talk about the problems, you'll never solve them. So let's talk about the problems.
Yeah, that's so true. Is we tend to just kind of bop along and we're like, no, everything's wonderful. I go to the beach, you never go to the beach. I go skiing, you never go skiing.
Yeah,
that's one of those things in California. It's like, well, where else could you live where you could go to the beach in the morning and be skiing in the afternoon? I don't know a single person in all of my years who that I've lived in this state who's ever done that. But yet it's on the commercials all the time.
Yep.
The tourist commercials, like, you could do this. No one does it.
Well, that's an exhausting day.
It is. Who
Come
does
on.
that?
I
I
have
get
things to
tired
do.
going to the beach alone. So you've been here 11 years? Is that what you said? About 11 years?
Yeah, I've been here 11 years. Before that, I lived in New York for 11 years, just about the exact same amount
Okay.
of time.
So
But
had you been out to California before you moved here?
I had for work. I've been to San Francisco for just for vacation, the Bay Area, and then I've been to LA several times for work. But when I moved out here, I didn't like LA at all. I lived in the Midwest, East Coast. I was offered a job out here. I was ready to leave my job in New York. I was just kind of like, what the hell, let's do it, and moved
Yeah.
out here. But yeah, I really found, the stereotype about Los Angeles about, people being superficial, uh, only only looking at you in terms of what can you do for them in terms
Mm-hmm.
of their career. I mean, these are really Hollywood stereotypes, not Los Angeles stereotypes. But
Yeah.
when I first got here, I found that a lot of those felt like they were true, and I had a way harder time meeting people I really liked than I had when I was in New York.
How long was it before you kind of felt like you were clicking along on the LA lifestyle? Like how long before you really felt comfortable?
I think it was once I did feel like I had that friend group around me, and I moved out here in May, and then in December, a buddy of mine from New York flew out, and we went to the Christmas party for Adam Sandler's production company, because he knew some of those guys. And with him, he brought a couple of buddies of his, and they were all from Chicago. And I immediately got along with those guys, and then I was like, okay, I can hang out with these guys, and they became, some of my best friends out here. And then I felt, okay, I see people like me living out here happily. So now I know that I can do it too.
You realize that the entertainment is just another industry, and there's people in it that are good, there's people in it that are annoying, there's people in it that are superficial, and there's people that are down to earth. It's like anywhere
also
else.
it's a fraction of Los Angeles, like what
it
Hollywood
is. It is.
It's
a large fraction though.
Large and powerful and influential, absolutely. But if you don't want to be in that world of that entertainment world, you certainly don't have to be.
The other thing you realize too is, at least I did, I don't want to put words in the reporter's mouth, but what I've always learned is, like, you have this image that you show up and it's going to be the entertainment world, and everybody's like, oh, there's celebrities everywhere, and there's directors and writers, and everybody's these like really well-known people, even if it's by their work, and that's the entertainment world. And then you realize, but there are thousands of people, who are tens of thousands of people who are employed in the industry, who it's just a job,
right?
They just put in their grips and lighting guys and catering and all these people, and to them they're just like, I work for Disney. Oh, you make this? But it's what I do. I'm proud of it, but it's what I do.
Absolutely. It's got a great union, it's a good job. And
you make good
even writers. Money. Oh yeah, even writers. I've done a little writing for TV, and writers, I felt like that, like I'm just, I'm behind the scenes, have nothing to do with anything at all Hollywoody or glamorous, certainly. And
but you did used to work for Vice, though. You did used to work for Vice. You worked for Vice, Maxim, and you worked for Cosmo.
I did.
How do you end up at Cosmo? How does that happen?
Completely by accident. When I was at Maxim, which is kind of my first job out of college, this is back in like around 2000. So when Maxim was really like a big deal, and it was a great first job out of college. But we did some stuff with Cosmo just because it kind of made sense. They do stuff for us, we do stuff for them, and then put Maxim on it. So we got all the Cosmo readers, and they got all the Maxim readers.
Oh, okay.
And then I kept
Synergy. Isn't that what they call it?
Yeah. That was above my pay grade. I just wrote the stuff. But then I kept freelancing for them, and I went in one day. I left Maxim and after about 5 years there, because I wanted to be a freelance writer. Like that's what I wanted to try that in New York, and then did that for about 4 years. And then, at the end of that 4 years, I went into Cosmo to talk about a story, and an editor was like, "We actually have a deputy editor opening here. Would you be interested?" And I said, I don't think so. Like, I've never thought about working here, but I mean, you always want to hear more.
Mm-hmm.
I think several days later, they offered me a job, and I took it. And then I spent about 2 years there.
Mm. What's your sweet spot? So what, and when I say that, like, what is the stuff that you really enjoy writing about and it gets you going?
And I think I really am a generalist at heart. I mean, I wrote stuff at Maxim that was so fun and funny and goofy. But then at Vice, I wrote or edited very serious national security stuff, stories, and I really loved that. That was really energizing and exciting. So I honestly feel like there's not like one sweet spot for me. In some ways, maybe it's just a new thing. I love working on a new thing.
So that so writing about like foreign policy or something is great, but you don't have to completely immerse yourself in it 5-6 days a week for months or years at a time. So you like being able to get away from that, like a palate cleanser? Is that?
Yeah, so I was at Vice, I was mainly an editor.
Mhm.
And so I was lucky to work with really great writers, like a guy named Jason Leopold, who's at BuzzFeed News now, has been, I think, the last 2 out of the last 3 years on the shortlist, finalist for a Pulitzer with his team. I would work with him. So he had years and years of knowledge about what he wrote about national security and government secrecy and Guantanamo Bay, all this stuff. And then I was able to work with him as an editor. And he would say, make it better to read. I reported and wrote with him a little bit, but I didn't need to have that brain because he had the brain. So I just kind of, I helped out, I guess you could say, as an editor and an occasional co-writer. But I couldn't have hopped in and done the reporting that we did. A lot of it was based on Freedom of Information Act requests that he had made years before, right? And then we would write a story about it. So without him having done that, we wouldn't have had those stories.
What are there stories that you want to cover that you haven't had a chance yet, or they're big? Not to don't want to take any secrets or be like, oh no, now he's not be able to pitch this. But are there areas that you are interested in it that you would like to dig into, that you would like to get into and do some coverage on?
Yeah, there definitely are. I think the plague of misinformation and disinformation that not just America, but the world is suffering right now. I think that is endlessly fascinating. And, maybe aside from climate change is the most serious problem the world faces right now. I haven't done much reporting on that per se, but I think
so which part
that,
of it, the fake news, the troll farms, the algorithms, like which aspect of that?
well, it all gets for me, it all gets back to what I was saying. I tell, about students is first, here's how you tell whether something is reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think basically, how do we solve this? How do we teach everyone to know? Or how do we come up with technology that prevents people from believing BS? I mean, that sounds like pie in the sky right now, but I feel like if we don't start figuring that out, we're just going to fracture more and more and more and more until who knows.
But it's difficult when it's something they want to believe. It's that whole, it's easier for that if you put something in front of them and they're like, ooh, I like that because it fits into my belief system. They're automatically going to pull it in before they go out and check out their sources or check out where it came from. There's an issue.
And if they read something they don't want to believe, they will go find something that tells them what they want to believe and then say, see, I'm right. No matter how clearly BS that other thing is.
Yeah, I had a great conversation with Lee McIntyre about that. He wrote a book called How to Talk to a Science Denier. And he actually went in he based it on going into a flat earth convention and he kind of went in undercover, and he talked to them. And it's like, you can't have a discussion with somebody who is going to believe something because they fit it into their way of looking at the world, because basically you're dealing with somebody who's never going to change their opinion because they believe that there's the potential that it could not be true. So thereby there's always the potential that they've been lied to, and they're never going to go into a new belief system because there's that chance. There's an amazing example he gives about somebody. He offers to fly them over the South Pole in order to show them that the world is not flat. And they said, yeah, this is the really short version, but he said, well, we would have to refuel the plane because we're going so many miles. And they said, yes, but there's the possibility that there's a conspiracy that they've been filling planes with gas they don't need all of this time. And even though they aren't flying around the world, so thereby, because of that possibility, I cannot believe anything that I see. And how do you fight somebody with fake news, or how do you fight somebody who's looking for news to fill their agenda? There's the issue.
No one's figured it out, but I think somebody smarter than me, I remember talking about this relative to 9/11 conspiracies, I believe. And one reason conspiracy theories are so popular or so seductive is that by believing them, your brain is tricked into think you're taking a measure of control over a situation that is completely out of your control and terrifying. And I think a lot of people feel out of control and terrified about the world, both for legitimate reasons and because they're stirred up by politicians, whomever it is, who want to make them afraid so that they then believe only that politician can save them, right? So I think making people feel more in control would be a start, whether that's, financially, economically, socially, whatever it is. And obviously these are massive problems, or they all have like sub problems to them, right? But I think it's all about that. People just don't feel like they're in control of their lives, and so they just reach for anything.
Do you notice this with the next generation of students? Because I'm guessing your students are what, like 18, 19, 20 years old?
Yep.
Right in college. They're coming into this new world with, you and I dealt with a totally different world. We knew when we looked at the New York Post, we knew it was bullshit on the front page, like usually,
right? Or
it was being spun, or the Weekly World News. We knew Bat Boy didn't really exist, but now you've got he's in a basement in Hackensack. I know.
I've seen a drawing. So.
but these kids coming up, they're born into a total entirely new world. They came up with the algorithms. They came up with the truth being shaped around them, down to the filters on TikTok. Automatically their images are altered. They don't even have a say in it. Their whole world is shaped around them, and it's created for them. What are you seeing from them? Are they adjusting to that? Do they have the ability and the tools to tell, this is not real, this is fake, this is being shaped around me? Do they have that?
I truly think they do, or that they can be taught that. My impression is often when I first see them in class, they haven't been taught that. What you just described, a lot of that is just marketing. They're just being marketed to constantly, all the time, but they don't see it. To them, it's content, that horrible word that people use to describe everything, which even that, flattening out everything and just calling everything content, that's super damaging. I don't let my students use that word to describe journalism because it just equates it with any BS stupid thing. It's all the same. It's just content, which is so damaging. I think they just need to have it pointed out. I mean, I find that when I help students see it, or I point it out, or I have them read things that, kind of opens their minds a little bit or shows them stuff, they're very eager to be told this stuff because it helps them understand the world better. I think that is another way to give people control, right? Is to say, it's like pulling back a curtain or something, and being like, no, see, this is how these gears are working. This is not news. This is just someone trying to sell you something, or this is just someone trying to control you and make you do what they want you to do. This, on the other hand, is information that will help you make the best possible decisions, whether you're voting for somebody or whether you're trying to decide whether to bring an umbrella today. It's news. It's reliable news. And if everyone had that compass in them, I mean, we would be so much better off, I think.
But as a freelancer, do you, and I remember running into this too, and that's the reason I bring it up. As a freelancer, do you have issues that you run into where someone approaches you with a gig or with an article that they want you to write, and you look at it and you're like, this is basically an ad. This is not, it's one thing to be like, okay, will you write a review of this product, or we're launching a new product, can you write a blurb about it or whatever. It's another thing to come to you and say, can you write this article that makes this look good in the best light possible? So how, as a freelancer, do you balance that and journalistic ethics with paying the rent, paying the mortgage? Because there is copywriting. That's a job. And it's a legit job. People are very good at it. But what do you do?
There's nothing wrong with it. I don't want to say that advertising is bad or marketing is bad. I'm just saying it's bad when it's equated with actual information or journalism or whatever you want to call it. Presented as right.
That's why they put at the top of the article advertisement at the top of the page. You can't tell the difference. It gets
harder and harder. Yep. It gets harder and harder to tell the difference. So freelancing is a relatively small part of what I do. So I wouldn't have to do something that I didn't want to do, but I would be the last person to claim that I haven't done stuff like that. Let's just say, for instance, I've done a lot of celebrity stuff, celebrity profile stuff. Now, in general, magazines don't have someone on their cover in order to take that person down, right? They have them on their cover because they're going to say really nice things about them. Now, that's not stated outright, right? But it's understood that if I write a profile of somebody, I'm not going to destroy them in the story. I think if they were truly a horrible person, then that's another story. But
that's an expose.
Right. That's
a different. That's a Vanity Fair piece.
Yes. Yeah. And this, even with automotive coverage, what I was talking about before, if you're flown somewhere and put up and given nice meals and treated really well, I've had that happen and come back and written a not great review of a car, and I've had a PR person email me kind of like, what the hell? Like, without saying this, we had an understanding. So how can, what are you doing here? I don't want to, I'm not saying all car journalism or all celebrity journalism is that at all, but it's just, it's a fact. Find me a celebrity cover person, and then who has an article inside the magazine that is negative.
Well, normally, I always find that if somebody has something in their past, let's use a really old example so we don't tread on any current celebrities, but like Hugh Grant, we'll use him. That shows how old I am right there. Hugh Grant, when he got in trouble he went on Jay Leno, and he's like, what the hell were you thinking? And all of that. Then all the articles that came out about him, profiles, would mention that he had this mix-up, let's call it a mix-up with a prostitute. But they would spin it in a way where it's like, here's my mea culpa. Here's my, I'm moving forward. I learned from the experience. It's always a very positive way to deal with it. Or if somebody had a drug problem, or if somebody had this, there's a way that celebrity journalism spins those things and they don't dwell on it. Robert Downey Jr. crawls into somebody's bed and passes out from drugs and then gets put in jail for whatever it was, 90 days or whatever long. They don't go in while he's sitting in the jail cell and say, okay, now we're going to write the profile. They go,
Right.
we're going to wait till you come out. What have you learned from this? How can we spin? There is a definite spin to it. Because here's a question. Do you think we as an audience would want to read that article of him in the middle of his hell? Do we want that? We do
I
like the
would love
car
to,
wrecks. You would?
but
Would you
I
like
would.
to write it though?
Oh yeah, I would love to hang out with Robert Downey Jr. in his jail cell and like talk about his life and where he's at. That'd be fascinating. I don't want to put people's pain on display and just have it be pain porn or whatever you want to say. But sure,
Yeah.
I think that stuff's super interesting. But what you said, you make a great point. It's not that things are completely ignored. It's just that often it is this. Here's a chance to redeem yourself. Here's a chance to say to spin it however you would like. Here you go. And also when you write a profile, it's kind of your job to find the person you're profiling the most fascinating person in the world, right? And part of that is you can often end up falling in love with them a little bit, right? And I talk to students about this all the time. We'll read profiles in class and I'll point out things where I'm like, we just read one, we're doing profiles right now, and we just read a profile from a few years ago that was universally thought to be one of the best magazine profiles written all year. It's like a 5,000 word profile. I won't say of who, just to keep it a little anonymous, but there was something in the profile where the subject, the celebrity, said something about how they would usually be sitting on the floor to have this kind of conversation because it keeps them humble and grounded. And the writer was like, oh, how amazing. How much does that tell us about this person? They're amazing. But I turned to my students, I'm like, think about one of your friends telling you that, hey, let's sit on the floor so I can feel humble and grounded while we have this conversation. You'd be like, are you insane? What are you talking about? Like, let's sit in chairs and you can still be humble and grounded. So there's a lot of, if you read stuff like that closely, there's so much of just completely falling in love with celebrities that you are blinded to stuff that otherwise you'd be like, what are you talking about? Or what are you doing? Or why are you bragging about that completely mundane thing everyone does?
Yeah. And that's not just celebrities. I think we see that in political coverage as well.
Sure.
Because there was a day when it was, the Watergate way of looking at everything. Like, what can we dig up? What are the questions? Push, push, push. There's always another question behind the answer. And now it seems like a lot of political interviews have turned into celebrity interviews. It's just softball questions. It's well, depending on who you're reporting from, which tribe you're with, is it a left of center? Is it right of center? Is there an agenda behind it? It's become very celebrity tabloidy but not digging up the dirt, unless you're digging up dirt on the other side, and then it becomes this incredible thing. I mean, Biden, for example, he disappeared for like 12 days. And now when I say disappeared, it just means he wasn't doing press conferences. So suddenly it was people digging up, like, where is he? What's going on? Is he not healthy? Is he this? Is he that? And then he comes out and they do like these softball, very like, oh, look, he's alive. Oh, look, he's still president. Everything's, ask him some really lovely questions and we'll go on. No one ever pushes on some of these things. But that also gets me into, we talked about this a little bit, but you start getting into how the news is shaped, how algorithms shape what you see, how certain platforms, YouTube or Facebook, decide what is news, what is not news. That's dangerous when another service starts telling you what path you need to be on.
It sure is. What came out, with the Wall Street Journals and New York Times reporting about Facebook in the last several months, Facebook would push articles in people's feeds that said positive things about Facebook. Now you could argue that's a relatively minor thing, but multiply that by whatever, or think about that sort of thing, but really serious stuff. It's awful. Or people who get, my friends and I have talked about how we'll hang out with each other, then we'll go home and we'll get served ads about something someone else was talking about. And it's like, oh my God, they were listening. But I think what it really is just they know where we are. they know I was near this person that just bought a couch. So now I get couch ads served to me because they're like, oh, this person might want one too. I'm explaining that maybe poorly, but
well, it happens. Like I have people that I've exchanged emails with through Gmail a few times. That's it. 2 or 3 back and forths. And then I will get on Facebook, I will get a notification that I should be friends with them.
Yep.
So I mean, it's there. You can't deny it. I still wonder about the verbal one though, because like there are a lot of people that I talk to, and they're like, I swear I did not write anything about this. I just mentioned it, and now I'm seeing ads for it. But there's also the argument that it's the red car argument, that if you are driving around, you don't notice the different colors of cars, but as soon as you buy a red car or you start looking at a red car, then suddenly you see red cars everywhere. So it might be that you've always had those ads popping up, but now you just didn't realize it, and now you're noticing it because you spoke to somebody about it.
But they know everything you spend money on, what you spent money on in the last month, and then again, they know if you're next to a person who's spent and what they've spent money on, and so algorithms can figure out, okay, I'll bet that this person is maybe in the market for X thing because I know this other information about them. I don't know if it's necessary. I would never discount the possibility that microphones are on, or that they're doing things they shouldn't do. Obviously, they're doing things they shouldn't do all the time. But I think people just don't realize it doesn't have to be conspiracy about microphones being on. The information is already there. Like it's happening because of things we already know and are proven to be happening. They don't need a microphone on because they already know all this stuff about us.
Do you think there's an explosion point? Do you think there's a point where it becomes just too dangerous? It becomes the wrong information's out there. You're getting too much of stuff on one side or the other. People aren't communicating. Is there a critical mass point eventually? Do you think, as a reporter, as an instructor, as a professor, what do you think?
I mean, yes. I think. I guess it's how you define that critical mass point, but I think you can argue we are there, or that at least in specific situations we've hit that point where people are behaving in these ways that are just have nothing to do with rationality or reality. I mean, January 6th, storming the Capitol, and I think you could argue we're already there.
Do you another question then, kind of along the same line, is what about, we always used to talk about freedom of journalism, freedom of the press, freedom of telling the story. No one can block you. And it's funny, when I was a Chicago reporter, the cops were always trying to block our stories constantly. But
Chicago police are known for being really open and not doing anything they shouldn't do. And
okay. Anyway, that was sarcasm. That, if for those of you didn't pick that up, there's been an issue in the last decade about what does make up a real reporter. Have you talked about that with your students, or what do you think about that? Like, anybody now can say, I'm a journalist, I have a blog, I'm a journalist, I covered this story. What does it take for somebody to be an actual journalist? Has that changed?
So that's a great question, and I'm not sure I have the answer. Years ago now, I think it was CNN was talking about its citizen journalists, that it was like they were deputizing people to be journalists, which now obviously we constantly see cell phone video from people, but I think that might have also been a cheap way to get video. I think the act of reporting, good reporting, is what creates journalism. I think people, maybe when they first, if they don't know much about journalism, or they've only read a little bit about what journalism, quote unquote, is, they think journalism is objectivity, which it's not. No one can be objective about anything. We all have biases. If you go to a murder scene, you're not going to be, and then a gruesome murder scene, a family's been murdered, you're not going to be objective about the murderer or the alleged murderer. You're going to think bad things about that person, right? But you don't have to be objective. You just have to do good reporting. You have to talk to the right people, do your research, check your facts, verify information, and then write it in a way that's, you can have an angle, you can have a point of view, but don't inject your opinion into it, because that's not journalism.
No speculation.
No speculation. That's great. You can say, in fact, often should talk about what happens next. What does the, meaning, the police will hold a press conference tomorrow. That's going to happen. That's not speculation per se. You're telling people, okay, here's what to expect. People often like that in the story. But if you do those things, you kind of can put this wall up between you and your bias. Yeah. And if you can do all of those things and do all of those things, then I think that's journalism. But most people aren't trained to do that stuff.
What do you feel are the biggest transgressions that you see out there nowadays, that your instructors or your editors in the past would have kicked you out of the office and thrown stuff at you for? And that and that happened to me, so I know it must have happened to you. But what are they out there that you see nowadays?
Well, so the injection of opinion is a huge one. That's something that's really hard, for instance, to get students to stop doing, because it's like, internet writing, that's just kind of the style that has, the generic style of internet writing, I feel like, is at the end of the story, tell us what you think, what your opinion is. And so students often do that. They'll end the story with, here's what I think. You don't want to do that. And then I think it's so hard to know what a reliable source is for a lot of people, because there are so many sources on the internet, most of them not reliable. So there's this ocean of information. How do you know what is reliable, what is real, and what is not? Then add to that people who say that the reliable sources of information are unreliable, and hammer that home constantly. New York Times, yeah, they make mistakes. We could do a podcast about errors or issues with the New York Times, but overall extraordinarily reliable information. But a lot of people believe it's completely unreliable, right? Because they've been told that over and over and over and over. At that point, you don't know what reality is. If you can't believe this, the gold standard of reporting and information, then what do you believe? You'll just start reaching for anything to believe. It's an awful feeling. Like we are innately, as animals, programmed to want to know what is going on around us. It's instinctual. We just need that knowledge. So if you can't get it from one place, you'll find it somewhere else. Yeah. And I think that's what's happening.
But there's people who believe that every word of the New York Times is a lie. Every word. That word's right. It's like that bad. It's and some of that comes down to sourcing. Some of it comes down to sources, and we do a lot of reporting. I never did a lot of this because I was lucky. When I was at City News, like, you were not allowed to use anonymous sources. If you at least had to, if it came from a police officer, maybe a detective who was working a case, you couldn't list that detective because it would actually harm them, because a lot of times they were on gang duty or they couldn't get their ID out there. But you at least had to say a police source. And a lot of times I had to tell my editor who that source was, and it was held. And there were other times when he was like, was it the information officer? It was, and that could have been one of a couple different people. At least he knew it came from a source. But a lot of times you have to use, deep background. You have to use unnamed sources, and that can get a bit wonky because you lose your readership, their trust, if they're just like, oh, well, someone else said this and they said it was deep background. It turned out it wasn't true, and you're not naming your source. I want to know where that came from. That's a slippery slope, especially nowadays when people are just like, oh, well, we had a president who was like, I hear it from people. Oh, well, that must be true.
Mhm.
You know, who are
Mhm.
these people? You'll never know. Well, it's still true.
Right.
You know, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the trusted sources and deep backgrounds, stuff like that?
So I think that definitely is an issue. I think it's being talked about more and more. Um, for instance, this was years ago now, but for instance, the New York Times, maybe it was after the Judith Miller Iraq War reporting, where she
Hmm.
basically wrote stories about how there are WMDs, et cetera, in Iraq, and there weren't. But the New York Times is like, okay, we can't not use anonymous sources. If you want to do national security reporting, you cannot not use anonymous sources. That's it, you just can't. For similar reasons, because it will harm people. Now, it might not get them killed, or it might, but it might mean their jobs or their careers, right? But the New York Times will say, we will tell you why this person's anonymous, right? We'll at least do that to help explain why we're doing this. So that's a step in the right direction. A lot of times a source might be a person familiar with the situation. Well, what does that mean? It kind of means nothing. So that shouldn't be something acceptable. It
That
should
could
be
be
something.
anybody. That could be somebody walking
Yep.
down the street who's like, "Oh yeah, I saw something. I'm familiar with the situation."
Yeah,
That's
it
pretty
could be someone
broad.
who's a friend who heard it from someone who heard it from someone who heard it from someone. Like, you
Yeah.
don't know. But if it's more like, said a person who was in attendance at the meeting,
Hmm.
that's far more specific. And that tells you, okay, this person is legit. Like, they are someone we can trust about knowing what happened,
So how
right?
do you feel about protecting those then? When somebody comes in and says, "Show me your sources." Somebody, and I don't mean an editor, I don't mean somebody from the
Mhm.
publication. I mean externally, whether it's a government agency or legal or something, and they say, we want to know what your sources were on this story. You have to tell us." And a reporter, and that's what the SPJ battles and the Society of
Mhm.
Professional Journalists, and they fight that because those sources are holy. You know, you're supposed to
Right.
protect your sources. How do you feel about that? Like, when do you turn? I don't want to say turn. That's a bad term. When do you give them up? When do you say the importance of who this person is and how they got the information outweighs the secrecy and me protecting my source?
So I think I would say almost never. I would say a potential time when you would do that is if you know the source actually lied to you, or purposefully gave you misinformation or disinformation to control the narrative or the story, or do damage, or for whatever nefarious reason.
What if it was an
Um,
accused crime? Like somebody leaked something, like that's been one that comes up, like, oh well, they
uh,
committed a crime because they leaked classified material. You have to tell us who it was because you shouldn't have that. What about
no
a
way.
situation like that? No way. What?
No way should that person be given up.
Oh,
Now
it's a
there
whistleblower.
are categories, right? I mean, there are laws to protect whistleblowers,
Hmm.
but there are categories of top secret or secret information, right? There's a lot of, I mean, the federal government is unbelievably overclassified. They classify everything, or not literally, but things that they don't need to classify, in part just because, let's say you're making that decision and you could either classify or not. Well, let's say you're like, well, if there is something in here that really shouldn't get out, and I don't classify this, and it gets out, it's my ass. What are you going to do? You're going to classify it. Like,
Hmm.
okay. So I think that's happening a lot. And I think the government also keeps a lot of secrets, not because it's in the national interest or because it's protecting people's lives. They do it because it's embarrassing to them,
Mm.
which is not a good reason to classify it. So when you say someone who's leaked classified information, it's just, you need more information than that, I think. I mean, let's say someone is leaking, um, I don't know. I'll be honest, it's hard for me to come up with a scenario where I would say, yes, give that person up.
Like it would, the only one I can really think is if it was a legitimate situation where people were harmed, like Valerie Plante.
Mhm.
You know, I hope I remembered her name right.
Yeah,
It's
you're
been
right.
15 years. when like her, by that information being leaked, it literally ended her career, and it was done in a spiteful way. It wasn't done for the sake of journalism, for the sake of getting the truth out. It was done to harm her because she did not abide by what people believed she should have abided by. So that's an interesting time to be like, okay, well, how did this information come out? Someone did this out of spite, illegally out of spite. Even then, I think you're right. Even then, it's like, okay, well, do we start making exceptions that tear away at the entire idea of protecting your sources? There's a situation going on right now with the New York Times, and I have to laugh because we keep coming back to them.
Yeah.
And I'm not as familiar with it as I would like to be, but I know that they are in the middle of a lawsuit with Veritas. One of the
Project Veritas.
Yeah. And apparently there were some emails between Project Veritas and their lawyers that were leaked to the New York Times, and they are in the middle of this lawsuit. And so there's a situation where it's like, okay, well, now you have a media source that has access to emails that are covered by attorney-client privilege. They should not have these. They're publishing them, but they're also in the middle of a legal battle with them. And that's so murky, and what's going on here, and what's a source, and what's the story, and what's the legal part. And that's not your average journalistic situation. That's a very murky, where corporate plays and journalism plays and government's involved. Somebody at some point, I feel like, needs to be given up for that, just because that was not done that was not reporting. That is somebody who has an axe to grind. That is somebody who has a stake in this, trying to push back. But again, like I said, I'm not as up to speed on that as I should be in order to make such a grandiose statement. But where do you go for your news? What are your sources that you go to that you trust? You're going to say New York Times, aren't you?
Sure. I go to the New York Times, yeah, but I New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. So those. Do
you weigh it though? Do you weigh them against each other, and you check your sources, basically? Make sure that it's coming out evenly from different places. You don't just accept it. The Wall Street Journal said this, I take it as fact. Like, you do your due diligence, right?
So if it's, let's say the Wall Street Journal, a news story in the Wall Street Journal is so much different than an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, right? I mean, they're very, very different. If it's a news story, I would say it's possible that reporters are human. Sometimes they make mistakes. It's possible that there is a factual error in that story. Chances are, if there is, that will be corrected by the Wall Street Journal in the paper or on the story online very soon. All legitimate newspapers do that. It's funny because that's often pointed to by people who want to denigrate a paper. Is like, see, they even admit that they got it wrong. Well, that's why you can trust them, because they admit it when they did it wrong. But now that said, the New York Times might have a different angle on a story than the Wall Street Journal might have. And if you're the person writing the story, what you put in or leave out can change the story, right? It doesn't mean that you've lied. It doesn't mean that you've put something incorrect, not factual in the story. But it can cause people to interpret that news differently, right? So I think everyone has to have, as you brought up, kind of have that in mind as they're reading stories, that people, even without meaning to, might, you could say, spin a story. I think that's not the right word for what they're doing, but it's just a different way to write a story. If you and I were sat down with the same facts in front of each other and said, write this story, we would write two different stories that might make the news sound a little different. Not because we're trying to be bad people or spin it, just because that's the way it works.
My story would have Bat Boy in it.
Well, then your
For no
story would be
reason.
better than mine.
No
You
reason
win.
at all. I'm covering a garage sale, and suddenly Bat Boy shows up. So what's up next for you? Are you in class right now? What month are we in?
Yeah, we're in
We're almost
class.
in December. So
Yeah.
what do you got
So
coming up?
yeah, finals are early December.
You failing anyone?
No.
I get a news scoop right here. Journalism
So
student fails at Loyola Marymount.
no, what I used to, I was a hard ass. Once COVID hit, that was such a bum deal for students, and
Yeah.
so I felt so bad for them. If I would have, like, my any year of mine in college, if I would have been told, oh, you have to go home and live with your folks again and like
Ugh.
be on the computer, I mean, I would have freaked out. I don't even know what I would have done. So I I've taken it far easier on them grade wise than I had previously, just because it's a bummer.
You're back in
Even now,
class. You're back in class though, right? You're back in
back in
live
class
class.
with masks. Yep.
Hmm.
Which is it's shockingly hard to teach because, I mean, not that I just figured this out, but not being able to see half of someone's face makes communication in that environment so much harder. Um, you know, yeah, I never expected it to be that much harder to communicate with people, and students are troopers, and we've had a good semester, but it's still challenging, and for them to be reporters and go out and report is also harder. It's still harder. I mean, LA is, a relatively, I shouldn't say locked down city, but I think have a lot more rules in place than other places in the country.
We
So
definitely
that's harder
do.
too.
We definitely
Yeah.
do. We also have an odd pushback here.
Yeah.
It's almost like, and again, this is my opinion, not a reverse pyramid fact story, but there's kind of a weird underground in LA of people who don't on the surface want to push back, but they do in these strange little ways, whether they go to the gym and whip off their mask, or they just make it difficult if they have to, because you have to show vax cards almost everywhere you go if more than a few people are, museums,
Mhm.
gyms, restaurants. And I think people find these little passive aggressive ways to kind of push
Yeah.
back and just be like, oh, well, I'm going to say it, show it a little louder. I'm going to wave it. Yes, I've got my booster. Yes, I've got this. And it's very, it's very odd when I talk to people from other places in the country and they're like, you guys have to wear masks everywhere. You guys
I've
have
had
to
the same
show your
experience.
vax
Yeah.
card, and I think Angelinos are definitely over it. I think Californians are
Oh
just,
yeah.
we're just done with it. Um, I know there's people who are left leaning who wanted Newsom gone, when
Mhm.
they were didn't like the way it's been handled. You may not remember this. You're a little younger. The Jimmy Carter gave a malaise speech once, the famous malaise speech,
Yeah.
basically saying that we're all in the doldrums and we need to pull ourselves up. That's kind of what it feels like. Kind of feels like we're just like, we've gone through almost 2 years of this and we're like, I'm just done. Just finished.
Yeah, and that didn't go great for Jimmy Carter
No, it did
at the end of
not.
the day. Yeah.
It did not. But according to
Yeah.
your article, it's going to go great for California. So,
Well,
no matter what your editor says, the obituary.
that's very much a sense of humor. When I read that, I laughed about. I can imagine him saying that. But I mean, I don't begrudge anyone for hating Newsom. I mean, when he went to French Laundry and had that,
Oh,
I think it was a birthday party, someone's birthday, or I forget it's that
yeah.
fundraiser. I don't want to say something wrong, but I mean, how can you not hate the guy when he does that?
It was just the timing of it was just
Right.
he had just come out and given like a speech or something had happened a week before, and it was just very like, wow. And that's when the elitist stuff started coming out. It's like, do as I say, not as I do. And Pelosi and her favorite, or the haircut thing that came out, she went and got her haircut and wasn't wearing a mask. And
Yep.
it's the idea. I mean, now we're veering into politics, but there's this populist idea that I really think is just surging across the country, and you hear it in news too. There's a show that I listen to, Crystal Ball. She used to be with The Hill and a couple other publications and TV shows, but there's times I have to turn it off because it's gotten to this, and I've said this before, it's nothing I'm ashamed of. I always considered myself a liberal, a progressive liberal, until about the last year. And now that the and that kind of, you touch on in your article a little bit. California has become much more progressively liberal, to the point where I don't recognize what I used to consider progressively liberal. So I basically have to say, well, I guess I'm left of center, because the center is now this different kind of mindset, and somewhere in between the two. But I think you're seeing a lot of pushback against, with this new left populist idea of the elites. Newsom doesn't understand what we're going through. Pelosi doesn't understand what we're going through. She's making money off of her stock trades, and all of that. So you heard about that, right? The people on TikTok who follow her stock trades and are making all this money, these kids, just by investing in whatever she invests in.
Oh, I didn't hear
It's
that. That's a good idea.
They follow all the congressmen.
All of them. I mean, they all make money off of stock trades. Ted Cruz went to Mexico to get away from the Texas the storm. And I mean, I feel like it's not about politics. It's about money and wealth and who has power. And that's the fact that the people who hate other people or hate each other, they have all these things in common. And if they just kind of were like, let's talk about the stuff we have in common, and let's stop this widening equality gap, et cetera, et cetera. I mean,
but that brings us back to the problem. That brings us back to the problem with the news, because these algorithms and Facebook and YouTube and all of these different platforms where people are going to get their news are being divisive, and they're tribalizing, and they're saying, okay, well, we're going to give you more news that supports the feelings that you already have. So then we can't have this gathering in the middle where it's like, let's actually have a conversation and sit down and realize that we may not agree with a few of the things, but the most part we agree. Everybody should have healthcare. Everybody should be able to buy food. Everybody should be able to have a good life. They should have the freedom to do this or that. Yes, there's fringe things that, not fringe like fringe groups, but things on just from the outside of where we meet in the middle that we're never going to agree on. Abortion rights or other things, never. But can we agree that we need to have the conversation about it versus just this shouting match across Facebook and then being insulated by everybody who believes the same thing you do? Therein lies the problem.
The people in power, it's great for them, because it's so much easier to control people who are in those bubbles, in those zones where they don't know what to believe, or they're constantly told that fact isn't fact. It's so much easier to control people.
But that's the job of the journalist too, right?
Absolutely. When autocratic leaders or dictators or juntas or whoever takes over countries, the first thing they do is eliminate the free press. It's the first thing they do. And there's a reason for that, because people have information. They can take much better control of their own lives, be happier, make good decisions. But if you're in power and you're not a great person, you don't want that to happen.
Right. So have you heard, how long's the article been out? The issue's only been out a week, right?
Something like that. As I told you, I only picked it up last night
at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
So have you heard anything? Have you gotten any feedback from readers or any kind of?
I've gotten one email.
Has anyone shown you the love?
No.
No one showed you the love.
I've gotten one email.
New York Times hasn't called.
From a reader who he found my email, and at first I was like, he mistakenly emailed me. He meant to email somebody else, and it was someone basically who was angry I didn't blame liberals more for California's problems, in a nutshell. But yeah, that's as much feedback as I've gotten. But that's the thing with magazine. Like, I don't think this is online. Maybe it will be eventually, but they don't want to give it away for free, right? Which makes sense. So
right,
you gotta read it in the magazine first.
Well, I would definitely tell, but I hopefully it'll end up online and people will give it a read. I found it really interesting because it lays everything out that all of us in the state are talking about. This is a legitimate conversation that is going on with people in California. There are a lot of people weighing whether or not they want to stay. There are a lot of people who are trying to figure out if they want to move to another part of the state, if it's just a city issue, if it's an urban versus rural thing. Well, heck, there's always every few years something gets floated about like, let's split the state into two states.
Right.
There's that old thing that's been going on since the 1800s.
Uh-huh.
So it definitely is. I think it's a vital article, and it's really I hope that people read it and understand that this is a conversation that is going on with people. I have a conversation about a topic in this article every day with somebody. So I really feel like you tapped into something with that. So tell your editors to let you do more like this.
Yeah, like we said, it is, if things will get better, people actually talk about that. And this isn't about politics. These are all problems. I think anyone could agree. Yes, this is a problem facing California. Maybe the ways to solve them are different, but that's what it's all about, right? Like, okay, well, let's figure out a way we can all be okay with.
Yeah, let's have that conversation. That's what it always comes down to, is we have to sit down and have an open conversation. I don't know if we do that online, if we get the masks off and sit in coffee shops once again and be like, I don't agree with the way you feel about my government. We need guys in soapboxes on the corners. Maybe that's what it is, yelling at passerby.
Sure. I try anything at this point.
So
maybe we can at least all agree Elon Musk is a douchebag. Maybe that could bring us all together.
He's an alien. And Jeff Bezos is really Lex Luthor. That's kind of the way I look at the world. These things I believe. That's gonna be my new book. These things I believe. Jeff Bezos is Lex Luthor.
Lex Luthor in a spacesuit and a cowboy hat.
There you go. See?
Yeah.
He got William Shatner into space, so there's a win there.
Fair point.
So do you do social media? Do you do any of those types of things where people can come check you out?
Yeah, I'm not super active, but yeah, I have, Twitter and Instagram, but I'm on Twitter a lot. I don't tweet a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to do it more, and after a while I was just like, man, oh man, I always feel worse like coming away from Twitter. So
it's the great wilderness.
Oh man, it's so toxic. But it's also a great source of news, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can set up your feed right, and
but you still got to paw through it. You still, like we keep saying, is this real? Is this not? Is this commentary? Mm-hmm. Is this news? That's the hardest part. Is by the time you get halfway into something, you can't figure out, is this person writing about something because they're an expert, or are they writing about something because they're an expert and they are going to give their opinion and shape it as a commentary? If there's somebody if I wanted to read an article about the movie industry and some director sat down and said, okay, well, I'm going to write this commentary about the industry because of what I know. Here's my example. There was the tragic shooting on the Rust film set where Alec Baldwin killed the cinematographer, and you saw a lot of commentary articles start to come out from people in the industry, and some of them were some of them were just annoying because they were literally self-promotion. They were literally people saying, well, I've done this film and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this, and what happened on that set was bad, and that was it. And
let me tell you about myself.
Yeah. Exactly. It becomes this big promotional thing. It's like they're on a book tour or something. And then there are other ones saying, okay, well, here's my experience. Boom. Here's why I see problems with the situation based on my experience. This happened, this happened, this happened. Then that's different. But half the time you start investing in these articles, you get halfway through it and you suddenly realize that this is not news. And I think some people get all the way through and they're like, oh, that was news. No, that was an opinion piece. Yep. That was a talking head with their fingers.
It's so hard to, and if you're doing both, if you're reading journalism about it and opinion, that's totally fine. Like I read plenty of opinion pieces, and but yeah, the Rust shooting is so fascinating in part. I mean it's horrific, but then also how it, like Hollywood and the left and liberals and whatever you want to say about Hollywood clashes with gun safety in a way, right? And I mean, I remember reading about that story and about how that gun was handled, and I'm like, how have they ever handled, like, that's mind-blowing to me. That
Yeah.
like, for instance, Alec Baldwin took the gun and that his job, part of his job isn't to check it himself. Like you always check a gun, right? Like even if, no matter what, you make sure.
Yeah. There's protocol. I've done a lot of films with weapons, and there is a protocol. You crack that gun, the armorer, or there's, even if it's a low budget film, there's always somebody who only handles the weapons, and their job is to crack that gun, show it to every single person in the vicinity, and that's actors, that's crew, and to show either it's not loaded, show that it's blanks, to actually show that. And usually they do it, sometimes they'll do it 2-3 times. I mean, there's a redundancy to that. So to read the stories coming out, I'm like, I have never been on a set where that wasn't followed, you know? And it's just, I was the same way. I read what was going down, and I've been on some really low budget sets where they have skirted some things, but not the weapons. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see how that happens, because, you know, protocols start getting, they play fast and loose with them sometimes on some of these sets. And I actually knew someone who was working on a film shooting near the Rust set, another Western. They were a few miles away, and they were having issues as well using local crews. And from what they'd said, the LA crew walked off their set as well because they weren't feeling safe with the local crew. Now, what does that say about New Mexico? What does that say about hiring practices? That's a whole other discussion. But it is a fact that you get on some of these low budget sets, and it's like, we got to go. We got 20 days to shoot what really is going to take 2 months, you know? Right. And things get passed. Baldwin, man, he's screwed. Oh God. He's just screwed.
Because I mean, if you're suing somebody, who are you going to sue? Like the armorer or multi-millionaire Alec Baldwin? You know, like everyone's suing Baldwin, no matter what, over this, you know. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be suing him. I don't know that, but
it'll be interesting what happens with because that's part of the reason they always do an LLC with the productions, so it limits your liability. But he was the executive producer. He signed on. I have a feeling there's going to be charges against that armorer. I think there definitely will be some negligence charges. You know, but civil cases, man, civil cases are a totally different beast than criminal. So anything can happen. But I don't think we're going to see Baldwin working for a while.
Until he needs to work to make money to
until pay somebody. But I mean, you've got other ones like Kevin Spacey just got hit yesterday with over $30 million.
32,
He owes the producers of House of Cards. And I'm guessing that he doesn't have $30 million right now, you know? So what do? You know, he may start doing he may start Nick Caging it and start doing every single one that he can do, you know?
Or Bruce Willis.
Oh, Bruce Willis will do anything. I know a lot of people have done some really low budget stuff with him recently. And but it pays. It's easy money for some of them because they go in, they work 6-7 days, they'll make a couple $1 million, and then and life is the films are so fast now. It's not like the movie theater days where it would be in a theater, and if it got taken out after a week, everybody talked about it. Now it's all VOD, it's all digital, it's all streaming services, you know. So it's such a different world. Journalism's the same way. One story, we used to dwell on a story for 2 or 3 or 4 days. Now it's 2 or 3, 4 hours, and it's gone. You know, on to the next thing. What's the next tragedy? Man,
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Did your editors used to say that? Hey, it's sexy, that sells. You know, violence and sex. Like, we gotta go.
If it bleeds, it leads.
That's the one.
Yeah,
I totally remember hearing that one.
Yeah. I mean, and that's still the case, especially local news. If you watch it, it's always the most horrible thing that happened that day is the lead of the news. I mean, it works. You scare someone right at the beginning, they'll watch the whole newscast.
Oh, absolutely. Will your soda kill you? Watch tonight at 10. And...
we'll tell you in minute 29.
Yes.
And also the answer is no.
There's those small town news ones are tough though, because that's when you start getting into a real conflict of interest.
Mhm.
So I was at one small town paper, and my editor was also the minister in the local church.
Mhm.
And so certain stories got sanitized, certain stories got run up to amazing. Whenever the church did something, it was above the fold. um
Uh-huh.
but it definitely, plus advertising dollars, like we talk about advertising dollars on a corporate network, that's one beast, but it goes all the way down to the local person. If they buy an ad, they're going to get a story in the paper, and that's
Mhm.
an open thing. There's no secret to that. That's the way it
Right.
works. That's the and I've had people talk to me about that over the years, and they're like, no, newspapers aren't journalism, and it's not journalism anymore, it's just advertising. So it's about ad revenue. It's not about truth in journalism or getting the story out. It's about making the community happy and letting them know what the new sales is as that May company or whatever the store is.
That's the danger of that, flattening everything out into content, or what, or kind of really masking what is an advertisement and what isn't, is that there still is journalism in there. It's just you're making it impossible for people to know what is and what isn't. And so they understandably assume nothing is.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's such a short-sighted uh, business practice. Because people talk about the death spiral in newspapers. Often, you know private equity firms will buy papers, or big corporations. Well, private equity firm, what is their one job? It's not to serve the public,
Mm-mm.
it's to make money. And so they'll buy a newspaper, fire a bunch of people, bleed all the money they can out of newspapers, especially well established ones, often own property in a city, really, a nice building, downtown, really expensive property. They'll sell that property. Look at the LA Times. The old LA Times building is now condos or something.
Mm-hmm.
They sold the building. And the news gets worse and worse because there's fewer reporters there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
people who are like, why am I subscribing to this? Why am I buying this? The news, there's nothing for me in here. I'm not buying this anymore. So now the paper makes less money. So now they lay off more people. Then the news gets even worse. Then even fewer subscribers want to subscribe. And it just, until the newspaper is dead.
It becomes kind of with the larger corporations, doesn't it become kind of a loss leader? It's almost like something that they know they're going to lose money on. I'll use the Tribune Corporation as an example.
Mm-hmm.
They own television stations, they own multiple newspapers, they own not wire services, they own digital platforms, content promoters. Like, they're making their money off of all that. They're not making their money off the Chicago Tribune. So to them, it's like, well, if you pay attention to our television station and our radio station and all of this, we'll almost give you the paper for free. It's like a little
Mm-hmm.
bonus, and so don't take it so seriously because you're getting it free. Don't hold us up to this journalistic light. And I say that having worked there, and at the time, the reporters who worked there then, and I'm not saying anything bad about them now, because I know they work very hard and they take
Mm-hmm.
their job very seriously. But when the corporation looks at what they do in a different light, it's going to change how their work is presented to the public. So they can work on what should be a Pulitzer Prize winning article and do the due diligence, but then if it goes to their editors and it goes to the board and it just gets changed or swallowed up or truncated to a couple lines on the back page, all of their work is for nothing because the corporation isn't using it like they should.
Or they just don't even have time to do that kind of journalism
They
because there's so
don't.
few people. And
Yeah, that's another thing people don't understand is now the deadlines. There was also a really bad practice of going in and firing all the people who were more experienced because they could bring in younger reporters. So if somebody has a pension and somebody's worked up their raises and they have 20, 30 years of experience and they know what they're doing, they know how to get the source, they know how to get that, they have the connections in town, they know who to call, they know who they can trust. And then now you get somebody right out of J school who doesn't know. So you better be careful.
City entirely. Yeah.
Exactly. And you better be careful with those students because you have responsibility. You're churning out the next generation of journalists. So don't mess it up.
Well, I'm doing my best. I promise.
You promise. I know.
A-
I'll call you up. I'll hold you to that. I'm like, dude.
as I tell them, if they figure out how to fix this, they will be rich and famous if they can fix journalism. So they should figure it out.
There's got to be a way. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a grumpy old man, but man, what's happened? I miss coupons too.
Yeah. And weird classified ads.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in like alt weeklies, like the weird classified ads in there. Like those are always fun to grab, like Village Voice. I remember when I moved to New York, you'd grab that just to read the classified ads.
Oh, yeah. And the concert listings, and there was just something, what do you want to go do tonight? Grab the LA Weekly. Let's see what's playing, or who's at the Viper Room or whatever. God, I'm dating myself with that. All right, man. We're digressing into memories at this point. So
All right.
I really appreciate your time. That was a lot of fun. We'll try to get people to find you on social media, but no matter what, pick up the latest copy of Men's Journal. Go wherever you can. Hopefully it'll be online. It's definitely a conversation starter if you live in California or wherever, just to see that you brought up some really good points. And I'm hope that people take it to heart and start to chat about it. So appreciate that. Well done, sir. Well
You
done.
too. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
We are two old guys on the back porch.
We are.
He is Tequila Dan.
He is Steve Scotch.
And we have the lovely and talented Cat, that's CAT, making this thing happen.
Hey, y'all.
We cover everything from music,
Sports,
hot old chicks,
booze, definitely lots of booze.
and anything else that pops in their head.
Where can we be found?
We can be found on Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Amazon, Spotify, and all your other premium podcast platforms.
Two old guys on the back porch can be picked up every Thursday.
Give us a listen.
Hey, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. Help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review. If you want to support us even more, you can find a link to our Patreon account in the show notes. And if you're one of our diehard fans, head on over to thevikingdogstore.com, where you can find official Open Highway merchandise to show your support to the entire world. But most of all, thanks for listening.
For the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.
All rights reserved. Viking Dog 2021.